3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. With me here is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we're doing a bit of a retread here as Dan didn't show up for the stream, and I figured it was important to at least go over what I had discussed with Matt in the Ring Lords live stream, except this time discuss in video form with Dan, just to catch him up so that the next stream is not spent just wasting time trying to catch him up when, we could just do this in a video. I do think it's important for our viewers to get your impressions of this first chapter because it's your first time reading Lord of the Rings, and this is going to be quite fun, I think, for people to listen to. I already went over a great deal of lore details in the stream, so I'm not going to go over things like the Boffins and the Bofors, as that would be retreading old ground that I don't think anyone cares for me to retread. That said, the beauty of this chapter is just how neat the storytelling is. The story starts off with Bilbo announcing that he intends to celebrate his 11th birthday. You just know that this can mean nothing but trouble. This was, I think, the 5th or 6th or 7th attempt at this chapter by Tolkien, and it came out really good. We get into how Bilbo is inexhaustibly wealthy beyond all imagining as far as the hobbits are concerned. We get in a basic summary of what happened 60 years ago and how he's not on great terms with everyone, but he's on good terms with others. He's got a young sort of nephew, sort of cousin, his adoptive kid, Frodo. Bilbo and Frodo share the same birthday, September 22nd. Bilbo having shown a considerable amount of compassion towards Frodo because Frodo was living in the Brandy Hall and was one of many kids there. So Bilbo recognized him as a Baggins and as his closest relative decided to invite him over. After that, he couldn't get rid of the kid. A good deal of the story from the gaffer, who explains that Frodo's mother was Primula Brandybuck, who was first cousin of Bilbo Baggins on his mother's side, her mother having been the youngest of the old Took's daughters. At this point, maybe I should just do a Great Family of Arda video just on the Tooks. Before the next stream, people will get to see the Took lineage, and this will be for ease of access for everyone.
A visual representation wouldn't hurt.
Drogon was the father of Frodo, and he ended up taking his wife out on the Brandywine River, where the two drowned, according to the gaffer. Matt from Dark Lords ended up pondering with me the question of what were they doing out there on that river? It's actually a mystery. We don't know why Drogo suddenly had the urge to go boating, but we know that Frodo kind of is left with a dislike for water. But on the other hand, he starts to feel a compulsion to see the sea early in Lord of the Rings, which puts him at a crossroads emotionally, as he doesn't exactly trust rivers and whatnot. He saw his mom and dad drown, which... What did you think of this backstory to Frodo? It's not explored in the movies.
It's a pity because it's a bit of an aspect of the symbolism behind many of the hobbits. The water is mysterious. To explore it requires adventure. So to avoid it and to kind of fear it means they don't want to go further than what they
already know. Yeah, okay. That's a really good analysis.
And yes, it's dangerous.
Gaffer ends up mentioning how kind it was of Bilbo to take in Frodo. And we have people who are inherently suspicious and gossiping rather meanly about Bilbo Baggins. And so we don't get a full-on positive view of some hobbits, a good deal of them. But we also have those like Gaffer, who's a former gardener, with his son Samwise being an excellent gardener. What's also interesting is how the children chase after Gandalf, having heard stories of how he did fireworks once upon a time. And no one's seen these fireworks in generations. The children are naturally quite excited. This was a rather charming part of the chapter. I really liked it. It's also interesting that we have a clash between a gardener and a miller. Now that I think about it, a miller is someone who uses technology to, of course, produce bread and whatnot and food. And we have a gardener who can produce food, but does so through natural methods. Tolkien's, I think, kind of juxtaposing the old versus the new right here in a very subtle, nuanced way. I think that we're meant to side with the gaffer, and I do see why. We would, because Gaffer's right. When Gandalf arrives, chases away the children, who are very disappointed, and says, "Run away now, you will get plenty when the time comes." He refuses to light any fireworks for them, but he...
Later.
And the kids just basically go, "Oh," and go home. But it's also funny because we get a good reference to how skilled Samwise is as a gardener when Gandalf says, "How bright your garden looks." Yes, I'm very fond indeed of it, and of all the dear old Shire, but I think I need a holiday. We already have reference to Sam's skills. Gandalf himself is going, "Wow, this garden looks great." So obviously it's improved since last he saw it. That goes to show that Sam is probably better than his dad at this.
And it also shows that Gandalf does care to slow down and look at the beauty around him.
Bilbo plans the party to an umpteenth degree. And here's an interesting anecdote that Eleanor Zhang, one of our new subscribers who's commented on a few videos recently, Bilbo invited 144 guests in total to his birthday party. Do you know what the original number of elves created in the world of Arda was at the dawn of time?
How many?
144. Tolkien's reused the number. The root number to 144, if you divide it by 12, is 12. If you look at it from the Catholic point of view, the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 is a very, very powerful number in Catholic mythology. Just as 9 is in Norse mythology, and of course 3 and 4 are also very powerful numbers in all mythologies all around the world. 3, 4, 7, 9, and 12 are several numbers to keep track of, as well as 40. So these are some of the major numbers in numerological folklore to keep an eye on. And Tolkien uses 144 for the second time. The elves, they soon are divided into 3 tribes: the Teleri, the Noldor, and Vanya elves. The 3 tribes of the elves, and you have the Harfoot, Stores, and Fallowhides. Tolkien divides the tribes of the elves and the hobbits in 3 pieces each. Bilbo tries to give a speech at one point, but is continuously interrupted because nobody wants to hear his speech. What did you think of that?
Rude.
On the other hand, he does tend to go on forever. People did not want to hear his speech. I'll read part of it, and Dan will give his insight and opinion on it, if that's all right. "My dear people," and you have here, here, here. "My dear Bagginses and Boffins, and my dear Tooks and Brandybucks and Grubs and Chubs and Burrowses and Hornblowers and Bolgers, Bracegirdles, Goodbodies, Brockhouses, and Proudfoots." Proud feet! And this is Proudfoot who interrupts, who has his feet, which are large and exceptionally furry, on the table itself. He's pretty rude. Proudfoots keeps going.
Good.
"Also, my good Sackville Bagginses that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I'm 11-1 today. Hooray, hooray, many happy returns," they shouted. "I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve."
He is getting into a roast.
That's actually what I think Dork Lord said. Commented that he roasts his relatives and whatnot, which is very apt.
In a way that everyone wishes they could.
Yeah, not everyone is as skilled a linguist as Bilbo, or Tolkien for that matter. Can you imagine having been roasted by Tolkien? It would have been one of the most delightful experiences, because he's so skilled with languages.
Well, if I'm going to be roasted, at least then it'll be entertaining.
In total, Frodo and Bilbo's ages come up to 144, the number of people present. Obstinate silence. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent, and they were getting bored.
To enjoy the countryside and to be content there. They are not willing to learn. They are not willing to grow. They're just there for the free food.
They truly do feel like spoiled children. I'm actually going to say something a little odd. They remind me of a lot of people I know in real life. A lot of people I've met over the past few years. You have all this information at your disposal. If you so much as send them a poem or share with them a song or a piece of literature or just try to discuss it with them, they react with horror at the notion of reading a book. "Oh, reading a book? I really don't have the time for that. Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that."
It is rather sad because reading makes someone someone far more interesting.
Yeah, it does enrich the soul. I think Tolkien's making a commentary here on these hobbits. While they are amusing and fun and hearty, they're not particularly well read. There are those who are entertained and keenly interested. Actually, as you'll see later, Samwise would be the one going, sing, 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 sing. Because Samwise is the biggest fanboy of Bilbo's songs and poems. Bilbo then disappears with a flash and a bang, and he's dubbed Mad Baggins. Weirdly, I'm going to say they're a little madder because, for one thing, they are angry, and for another, what are you living for? There's this clip from the Dead Poets Society where law, medicine, trade, and whatnot are all admirable pursuits, says Robin Williams' character, but poetry and music and love, these are what makes life worth living. I think Bilbo was trying to convey that over the past few decades and has given up, because he's conveyed it to a few, he has. Primarily the Tooks and the Brandybucks, and to some of the younger hobbits. But to many others, he can't.
You know, the older hobbits that refuse to listen, their authority and the respect that is given their way is wasted. And the young hobbits respect more Bilbo.
In some cases. There are those like Gaffer who honor and admire Bilbo. There are those who, like Sam, who do the same. Merry and Pippin obviously do, but Merry and Pippin are from the Tooks and the Brandybucks. They're the warriors of the hobbits, and the thing about the Brandybucks and the Tooks is they do understand where Bilbo's coming from, and they actually appreciate him. It's why they're so willing to let their kids be educated by him, because Bilbo basically took up the mantle of being a school teacher, the Shire, teaching Merry, Sam, and Frodo how to read, how to write in Old Elvish, and all sorts of other old wisdoms and knowledges. Then you have Gandalf, who comes slipping into Bag End, and Gandalf tells him, "You have had your joke and alarmed or offended most of your relations, and given the whole Shire something to talk about for 9 days, or 99 more likely. Are you going any further?" As the conversation goes, Gandalf tells him, "But I had to badger you. I wanted the truth. It was important. Magic rings are, well, magical, and they are rare and curious. I was professionally interested in your ring, you may say, and I still am. I should like to know where it is. If you go wandering again, also, I think you have had it quite long enough. You won't need it anymore, Bilbo, unless I am quite mistaken." Bilbo flushed, and there was an angry light in his eyes. His kindly face grew hard. "Why not?" he cried. "And what business is it of yours, anyway, to know what I do with my own things? It is my own. I found it. It came to me."
You see the corruption of the ring, and it isn't pretty.
Gandalf, who says, yes, but there's no need to get angry.
Trying to diffuse the situation.
"If I am, it is your fault," said Bilbo. "It is mine, I tell you. My own. My precious. Yes, my precious."
It is indeed creepy.
Did you expect it?
No, but I think it was always there.
Even in The Hobbit?
Yes, his reluctance to let go of the ring, even as far as The Hobbit, but the fact that he was able to resist a lot of the corrupting influence rather than the, pardon me saying this, mania for the ring. Here, it's gotten to his mind.
Yeah, it's started to infect him. Matt came up with the theory that had he kept the One Ring and brought it with him to Rivendell, he would have eventually left Rivendell to find himself a mountain like Gollum did, and begun living like Gollum did, and become exactly like Gollum.
I see it.
Thank heavens Bilbo evaded that fate. I love
Agreed.
Bilbo. I really do love Bilbo as a character. Becomes grave and says, "It has been called that before, but not by you. But I say it now. And why not? Even if Gollum said the same once. It's not his now, but mine, and I shall keep it, I say. You will be a fool if you do." Gandalf, who eventually comes to tell him, Now, my dear Hobbit, all your long life we have been friends, and you owe me something. Do as you promised. Give it up." Bilbo tells him, "I won't give up my precious away, I tell you." And his hand strays to the hilt of his small sword. What do you think of that detail?
The Bilbo and the Hobbit would have never threatened Gandalf. He would have preferred to find a way to diffuse such a situation.
He was a lot more diplomatic and meek. Gandalf here, though, I'll read this passage, and this might be the last that I read. Gandalf's eyes flashed. "It'll be my turn to get angry soon. If you say that again, I shall. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey, uncloaked." A step towards the Hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall and menacing. His shadow filled the little room. Peter Jackson actually does this scene really well and keeps it to the book.
Right now, he's not in a situation where he could play nice. He has to diffuse the corrupted Bilbo and appeal to burglar beneath.
On the other hand, great turn of phrase, "Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked." Gandalf is wearing a traveling cloak most of the time. Beneath that, there's the rest of his clothes. This is essentially him throwing the gauntlet before Bilbo, who backs away realizing who he's picking a fight with.
It is indeed impressive.
On the other hand, I don't know what has come over you, Gandalf. And Gandalf says, I have never called you one. A thief, that is. Gandalf tries to diffuse further. This is where we get an interesting admission from Bilbo that he can't help it. That sometimes he wakes up in the night worrying about where the ring is. He wants to know where it is at all times, and it has been growing on his mind lately. And he feels as though it was like an eye that is looking at him all times. And he has an urge to always put it on. And he tried locking it up, but he couldn't rest without it in his pocket, and doesn't know why.
So he's trying to fight against the ring. It's a losing battle.
But in the end, Frodo gets everything and goes to leave, and Gandalf tells him, you have still got the ring in your pocket. Also I have, and my will and all the other documents too. Better take it and deliver it for me. That will be safest. No, don't give the ring to me. Put it on the mantelpiece. It will be safe enough there till Frodo comes. We get here, Gandalf is not saying he can't pick it up. But here's the idea. If you offer to give it to Gandalf, even temporarily, how does Gandalf react? No, don't give it to me. The temptation is too much for him. So the idea is that to pass it in terms of possession to Gandalf, then to Frodo, it'll probably never make it to Frodo. So this is something Gandalf is very afraid of.
And such an artifact, one that would scare even Gandalf, it's not something you just
chuck around willy-nilly. The more powerful or mighty you are, the quicker it can corrupt you. And more thoroughly it can corrupt you.
It's why someone as humble and gentle as Bilbo, why he was able to keep hold of the ring in a way as its guardian for so long.
He ends up then choosing his favorite stick from a stand, and with a whistle and a cheerful call to the three dwarves who are members of the moving company he's working with, he goes off. Now, what do you think of the song, which apparently has come to be associated with Lord of the Rings? The road goes ever on and on, down from the road where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say.
Decided to go off into the unknown, enjoy the adventure that he had when he was younger.
But also a new adventure.
He's enjoyed raising essentially his son, but now it's time for him to retire.
He's fading into the background so that his child may grow larger. And this is the way with fatherhood, or at least parenthood. The parent is supposed to recede into the background so that the child may step more into the fore. Frodo regrets that Bilbo left and wishes he could have gone with Bilbo. Or at least that he could have said goodbye. But I think that the trouble is Bilbo had no desire to say goodbye to Frodo because dearly loved him. Or maybe begging Frodo to come with him. And I don't think he felt that. It was right to force him. This would basically be him forcing his kid to stay at home with daddy. And that's not right. The funniest prank of all by him. His gifts to some of his relatives and relations with certain messages. For example, for Adelard Took had apparently carried off many unlabeled umbrellas, possibly during the events of The Hobbit. You have Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence, and you have a large waste paper basket, as Dora was Drogo's sister and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She's 99 and apparently wrote them a lot of great advice and was a bit of a nag to do the two. Probably one of those aunties who couldn't stop poking her nose into their business.
Because it's something that might actually be of proper use, that will see usage.
Milo Burrows gets a gold pen and ink bottle, as Milo never answered letters.
He's trying to tell Milo, you need to start writing.
You have Angelica, who gets a mirror because she's vain. Hugo Bracegirdle, who gets an empty bookcase because he kept borrowing books and never returned them.
If he never returns them, it's important for him to learn organizational skills in that case.
That's a pretty optimistic way of looking at it. And you have Lobelia Sagville Bagginses, who gets a case of silver spoons. Okay. The ones she stole and that Bilbo had to buy back. The thing Matt and I didn't talk about is how old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. That's a lot.
That shows who he really cared for.
Gaffer's one of the poorer hobbits from Bagshot Row, and a lot of the poorer hobbits also got a lot of stuff from Bilbo. Old Rory Brandybuck, in return for much hospitality, got a dozen bottles of old Wynyards, a strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature, as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. Rory quite forgave Bilbo and voted him a capital fellow after the first bottle.
Of course.
That's very English. Some come along and labels get torn off and mixed and quarrels break out. And people start grabbing stuff that they're not supposed to, trying to pound on the floorboards and on the walls to try to find hidden treasure.
They're vultures. And it's unfortunate that Frodo has to deal with them.
And of course, he has to deal with the Sackville Bagginses. Only one thing is clear to me, and that is that you are doing exceedingly well out of it. I insist on seeing the will.
They remind me of Harry Potter's aunt and uncle.
They were probably inspired by them. And after waiting 60 years, spoons, fiddlesticks. What do you think of her speech? You'll live to regret it, young fellow. Why didn't you go to? You don't belong here. You're no Baggins. You're a brandy buck. Did you hear that, Mary? That was an insult, if you like. It was a compliment, said Mary Brandybuck, and so of course not true. Now Mary's been helping Bilbo all throughout the day, trying to steer things around politely. Mary's trying to resolve things for his cousin.
Letting Frodo rest up a little.
Mary's one of those guys, you call him up. He's there in an instant, skipping work if he has to help you move. Bilbo was apparently a frequent visitor of the Brandybucks. So a lot of Frodo and Mary's generation grew up listening to Bilbo's stories and getting a first-class education from him. As rich as Bilbo got out of the story of the Hobbit, he shared a wealth far greater than money. He shared wisdom and knowledge and education with people. That, in some ways, is worth more than money. Of course, you have Gandalf who comes along and goes, "If you don't let me in, Frodo, I shall blow your door right down your hole and out for the hill." Wow, that's pretty violent.
I mean, I don't blame Frodo for being annoyed because
He assumed it was Lobelia.
Because from what it said, she constantly came back knocking and trying to raid, and where Gandalf knows, like, the fact that Gandalf doesn't like Lobelia.
No, he really doesn't. He really doesn't. You have Frodo who began to consider using the ring because he was just so tired he wanted to disappear. Gandalf tells him don't do that, and we get Gandalf who tells him, I gotta go out for a bit, so be back soon and goodbye. The ending phrase being Frodo did not see him again for a long time.
Sure, I found it started a little slow, but once we got to the party, it got fun, and I liked the roast. I liked how it continued with all the gifts.
I like the slowness of this first chapter, and I like how it's slowly building its way up.
And that is important. Slowly building its way into it. Bilbo's far more whimsical here, but I guess aging the way he did,
he aged like a fine wine.
He got very whimsical, which he had, but it wasn't as elaborate. I would probably agree with them. It's like, how has he not aged?
Do you want to try hazarding a guess as to how?
A little jewel?
The ring in this chapter is far creepier than it's ever been in The Hobbit. It's starting to scare him a little.
And that the story that Bilbo pretty much said in the original book,
which, when you say that, you're referring to the first edition of The Hobbit, where Gollum gives the ring to Bilbo. That's a lie. The editions we've read for our channel, that's the actual events of The Hobbit.
The fact that Frodo pretty much confesses that he has heard a bit of the...
He did hear the real story. He's the only one that Bilbo willingly told it to, out of love for. As you'll see, a lot of other characters get the whole story out of Bilbo. As far as first chapters go, this one is nothing like the creepy, horror-esque first chapter of Hour of the Dragon. I kind of like the two chapters equally. I like that we have this festivity, but in the background there's this creeping, almost eldritch horror that's almost hunting Bilbo. But on the other hand, I do like the horror of the Hour of the Dragon with the revival of Zaltotun. So both are very, very horror-based. And I do say horror because this ring is very creepy in this chapter. Now, I have heard from some that apparently the idea is that the One Ring is your sin, and that it is why it is so hard to let it go. It's because it is a reflection of your own inner sin. For Gollum, it's something like gluttony. For Bilbo, it's something like greed.
It is plausible because you have Gollum that turned into an ugly creature, and...
But what's interesting is that Tolkien in a letter... Now, I saw this in a documentary about Tolkien. In the letter, Tolkien mentions that the ring, to his mind, is almost more a metaphor for the machine in a way, and the dependency one has on machinery. That one cannot live true to oneself so long as one is dependent on.
The obsession over the ring, the heavy dependence on it. Technology is meant to be a tool, not a crutch.
But I think the quote was that we have moved slavery into the back and claim to have erased it when it's still there. And that machinery tends to do a subpar, according to Tolkien, it does a subpar job in comparison to how man can do it. And that, for example, all things that you do with a machine, you can do better by yourself, by your own two hands and whatnot, for the most part.
Is indeed an interesting one. And even comparing it to Howard's point of view on things like that, it is a little sad that the world shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, pretty good first chapter. There's about 60 chapters left. It's quite the thick novel. and it's very dense content. You're going to need to crack it open and read sentence for sentence over and over again, and follow us as we go through this adventure. So if you enjoyed this video, once again, smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Sauron smashing Gil-galad to itty bitty pieces.